Hello everyone and welcome back to the channel. My name is Kellen with Apex Archery. So there you are, setting off into the woods with your buddies and looking over everyone's gear to make sure that you're ready for the hunt ahead. But then you explain to your friends that you have brought with you the harshest drawing and smoothest drawing bow in this longer axle-to-axle series. They look at you confused because you appear to just have one bow in your hands. Well, if your bow is the Proven 34 from Bowtech, you might just be right. Let's get this thing in for testing. All right, we are breaking down the Proven 34 from the folks over at Bowtech. Very excited to have this bow in for testing. It does boast an axle-to-axle measurement of 34 inches with a claimed brace height of 6 5/8. This particular cam configuration will support draw lengths between 25 out to 30 inches with a claimed system weight of 4.7 pounds. The IBO speed rating on this bow is 336, and all of that coming to you for $1,449. Before we begin actually measuring some of the specs out of this particular bow, I'd like to stop and say thank you to my friends over at Bear Creek Archery, the effective sponsor of this channel. They are kind enough to be loaning us all of the bows that we have in for testing this year. It also happens to be the shop that I trust for all of my archery needs. If you are in Colorado or traveling through the Front Range, please go visit my friends over at Bear Creek Archery. All right, so let's dig into this bow from the folks over at Bowtech. The first thing we're going to do is verify that axle-to-axle measurement, again, looking for 34 inches. And if we do go from center of axle here to the same on the other side, this one is coming in just a little bit long at 34 3/16 of an inch, so just a little bit long there. Next, let's go ahead and check into that brace height, looking for 6 5/8. And if we go from the deepest part of the throat of the grip to the center of the string there, I am coming up with exactly 6 5/8, maybe to the front of the serving there. So we'll call it 6 5/8 on that brace height. All right, next let's look into the riser geometry, or the overall kind of riser length. Anybody who's been with us before knows that I prefer a longer riser relative to that axle-to-axle, thinking of the riser itself as my vertical orientation stabilizer, pushing a lot of the mass of the actual shooting system, the cam, the limbs, the limb pockets, out away from that central shooting position by way of the grip. So if we do measure here, again, placing to the last point that the limbs are actually supported by that limb pocket assembly and the natural pivot point of the bow. This one is coming in at about 33 1/16 of an inch. That gives us a riser to axle ratio of 96.7%. So definitely getting into the longer riser relative to that axle to axle that we've seen on many bows so far in 2025. Next, let's use that exact same kind of natural pivot point of the bow and measure our reflex, which is, again, that measurement from that point to the throat of the grip. And I can already tell you, just lining this up, that this is coming in remarkably short. Yeah, that is coming in at 3/4 of an inch. Easily the shortest reflex that we've had on test so far, if that's important to you. Again, a lot of people suspecting that the closer you get that kind of natural pivot point of the bow to the actual pivot point of the grip, the less impact that torque or instability at the shot rather will have on final arrow placement. Okay, let's check into the weight. We are looking for 4.7 pounds. And again, this bow is completely kind of stripped down. We don't even have a rest installed just yet. So using our hand scale here, this is coming in a little bit heavy at 4.86 pounds, 4.86 on this particular bow. The last thing we're going to check into is our limb stance width. A lot of engineers from various companies over the years claiming that the wider that limb stance width, the more stable the bow is at full draw. So if we use our calipers here to measure, and this is coming in at 3 1/16 of an inch. So I think amongst the widest limb stances we've had so far this year. All right, I've got this thing all measured in. Meet me out on the range where I will give you my very first shooting impressions. And we will be shooting this initially in that comfort setting. All right, we are out on the range now with the Proven 34 from Bowtech. Very excited to run some arrows through this bow. As a note, we are going to be shooting this in the comfort setting. A little bit later, I'm going to do speed testing in both comfort and performance, and I'll talk a little bit about what the draw cycle and some of the shooting feels like when I do have it set to that performance for that speed test. Right now, I do have this dialed in for 30 inches of draw, as well as 70 pounds of peak weight, and we will shoot some 400 grain arrows to give you my shooting impressions. That is remarkably smooth to draw. Probably the smoothest drawing bow we've had on test so far. Really nice string angle, very, very comfortable position. And just a little bit of vibration on the shot. We do have those orbital dampers here installed. That said, the vibration on the shot, again, with the bow completely stripped down like that, is noticeable. I mean, very smooth to draw. Solid back wall, putting quite a bit of pressure in and getting almost no movement. Again, a little bit of vibration and a relatively crisp shot sound. I would guess that this is going to come in maybe even near the higher end, although I don't really see much by way of anything that would kind of kill sound on the shot out of this bow. Nice grip, kind of target style with nice groove on the front here that allows for that repeatable front finger position. And yeah, just a little bit of vibration and forward movement on the shot. Overall though, a really very smooth drawing, nice shooting bow from Bowtech. Let's take this inside and get it on the draw board. Very curious to take a look at the dynamic specifications and especially the draw force curve considering how easy this bow is to pull back. All right, we are inside now with the Proven 34, pulled now onto the draw board in our full draw position. I want to get a sense for some of the dynamic specifications coming out of this bow. The first thing that we do like to look into and measure is what we call the string to string measurement. That is from the last point here that the string is actually positively supported by the cam in the cam channel to the corresponding point on the other side of the bow. And what we're coming in is 33 3/4 of an inch out of this particular model, again, with those slightly smaller kind of rounded cams. From that same point, we can also measure what we're calling the dynamic brace height, or the updated brace height measurement to that last point, where again, the strings are actually applying load into the system at full draw. In this particular bow, the dynamic brace height is shrinking just a little bit, going down to about 6 1/4 inches at full draw. Next, let's take a look at the updated axle to axle measurement. This bow is going down to 31 3/8 of an inch when we are at full draw, meaning that our total limb deflection out of this particular bow is coming in somewhere around 2 13/16 of an inch. So quite a bit of deflection. As you can see there, the actual axle is getting relatively kind of parallel or past parallel relative to that longer riser. That is going to generate our string angle at the back of the bow. So if we do measure through the center of that string and the center of the arrow, kind of to the virtual knocking point here, this is coming in pretty middle of the road at 36.3 degrees. Next, let's go up front and take a look at the actual draw length. So this one is coming in fairly honest at about 30 inches exactly, again, when set with those mods in that 30-inch position. That gives us a total power stroke out of this bow of 21 5/8 of an inch. Now let's take a look at the draw force curve, and we are going to show you two different draw force curves here. The first one being when this bow is set with those flip discs oriented to comfort. As we can see, very, very easy drawing. It really stacks very evenly, reaching peak weight just a little bit past that 25% mark, holding very stable and beginning to taper off in the later half before kind of arriving home at a holding weight of 14.5 pounds in that valley there. That gives us an actual let-off percentage of 79.2, straight from the factory for this Bowtech. If we take a look at the area under the curve, we can see why it is that I thought that this is one of the smoothest drawing bows that we've had on test so far, because it is only requiring 1,180.3 inch-pounds to really get through that entire power stroke from the archer. That is also the amount of stored energy in the system that should be returned into the arrow for those speeds that we're going to look for next. Where things get a little bit, let's call it spicy, is when we flip this thing into the performance setting, and we can take a look at the draw force curve there. So as you can see, it keeps almost an identical profile as far as the way that it kind of climbs into that peak weight, but it maintains that peak weight all the way well past that 75% mark before effectively dumping off into the valley and a similar holding weight. The total area under the curve for that particular setting, again, the performance mods from that flip disc, is 1,253.5 inch-pounds, meaning this is actually requiring amongst the most energy we've seen from any bow that we've had on test this year or even last year. All of that energy should be returned in and getting us those speeds of 336 feet per second, again, when we do have this thing set to performance, so that's what we'll be looking for out on the range. Speaking of the range, meet me outside where we're going to go ahead and shoot this, again, in both the comfort setting and with those performance mods in place, and also give you some shooting impression information when we have it set to performance as well. All right, we are back out on the range now with the Proven 34. This set to the comfort for those mods, and again, 30 inches and exactly 70 pounds of peak draw weight. This first arrow is our 350 grain, so again, representative of that ATA spec for speed. Let's see what kind of speeds we get. That arrow going 316.6 feet per second. Next up is our 400 grain arrow. That going 297.6 feet per second. And finally is going to be our airstrike. This is 450 grains. So again, getting closer to the spec that we would expect to see people using for a field application. That going 280.0 feet per second. Those speeds are coming in a little bit on the lower side relative to other bows that we have had on test so far this year. But again, remember, this is also one of the easiest drawing bows that we've ever seen. I'm going to go ahead and flip this now into the performance setting to see what kind of speeds we're getting with that firmer draw cycle. All right, we are back out on the range now with the Proven 34, now with those flip discs altered to that 30-inch position, but with the performance setting. Our first arrow is a 350 grain arrow, so again, representative of that ATA spec that we measure all of our bows at. And this is dialed in and set to exactly 70 pounds of peak draw weight. And those performance mods do make that a very aggressive draw cycle. Really holding peak weight for a long time. That first shot going 326.8 feet per second. Next up is our 400 grain arrow. That shot going 309.0 feet per second. And last up is our 450 grain arrow. Again, getting more representative of what most people would use in the field for a hunting application. Yeah, really holds peak weight a long time. That going 293.9 feet per second. Those speeds are really beginning to cook now that we have this thing set to performance. All right, we are back inside with the Proven 34 after getting our speed performance out of this bow. Again, set in both that comfort setting in the earlier segment and then also in the performance setting. As is always the case, we like to shoot a lot of 350 grain arrows out of these bows to build a really nice average to get an actual speed rating for these. And we'd get 317.9 feet per second when we do have it set to that comfort. and 328.7 feet per second when set to that performance. So picking up about 3.4% by way of speed in switching into that performance mod. I do want to put up, again, the draw force curves here. Now you can see them overlaid to one another with the performance setting in red and the comfort setting in blue. You can really get a sense for why it is that I would describe this as one of the stiffer drawing bows that we've ever had on test. It's really not about the way that it climbs up to that peak weight, but how it carries that weight significantly further than that 75% before abruptly kind of dropping off into the back wall there and your final holding weight. Ultimately, I think that it's not just about kind of the total amount of energy stored within the actual system that dictates whether or not a bow feels smooth. It's about the fact that it's requiring you to really kind of continue to pull near that peak weight as you're trying to really kind of close off with some of those smaller muscles in the back of your shoulder and get all the way through that final segment of the actual draw cycle itself that makes this bow feel quite a bit stiffer. That said, I do think that you could, get used to that draw cycle, but if this were my bow, I would probably choose to shoot it with those comfort mods and maybe even increase the peak poundage a little bit to try to compensate for those speeds. All right, so let's dive into some of the features of the bow because the bow itself is feature packed. First, we should note that this bow does come in two different configurations with both the medium and the long draw cams. This one right here is actually with those medium cams, so it should be optimized around that 30-inch draw. We are getting 25 to 30 inches of total draw length out of that particular system, and if you were to switch to that longer draw system, it does give you between 27.5 out to 33 inches of draw length. The total kind of poundage or peak weight options for this particular bow is ranging between 40 out to 80 pounds, although advertised on the website right now is 50, 60, and 70 pounds. But then on the limb sticker here, you can see that they have it set ahead for 40 out to 80 pounds for peak weight that you can order. And then of course you can dial that poundage in more finely using those limb bolts and limb bolt turns on the system. One thing that I will note, because I'm adjusting these bows all the time, trying to find that exact ATA spec of 70 pounds, the limb bolts on the Bowtech, they happen to just like turn smoother than any other bow that we typically have in for testing. So very easy to kind of fine tune and make tinkering adjustments to that peak weight once you've got those correct limbs in place. All of the adjustment that we had talked about before is coming again from those mods. And again, you're using the exact same set of mods. You can see here set to the performance setting on that flip disc. You're just simply flipping those mods over to go back and forth between comfort and performance, making that adjustment at both the top and the bottom, and then adjusting this draw stop peg here as well for your actual draw length adjustment. Very important to note though that when you are making changes to those mods, you do want to make sure that the little indicator pin is in the right kind of groove there for the actual draw length that you are going to be shooting it at. So you really have to make kind of two adjustments to the bow to get it set to that appropriate draw length. And then again, picking either comfort or performance by way of those mods. All right. One thing that Bowtech is carrying forward and that they are known for is their wheeling adjustment system here, and they do call it their deadlock. So as you can see here, the actual cam assembly is really kind of slaved to that axle, and you can release the set screw here and then make left-right adjustments, actually moving the wheeling of the cam assembly right there, again, using that deadlock technology. So a really, really nice feature where you can actually do that fine tuning to fix all of those paper tears. Maybe you're fixing as you're changing between your target arrows and your broadhead setup. Whatever it may be, you can do all of that at home and without a bow press. Next up, we should actually talk about another adjustment feature that they have that is really nice to see, and that is what they are calling time lock. So time lock uses this kind of little gray assembly here that is attached to the cam and allows you to make finite adjustments back and forth, increasing the amount of tension on those cables to fine tune your timing, again, at home and without the need for a bow press. So again, really, really adjustable bow that you can work on right there at home to fix timing, wheeling adjustments, paper tears, and really get your setup dialed. All right. Let's talk about some of the features of the actual kind of riser assembly here. So one thing that they are again carrying forward for this year is their orbital vibration dampeners. You can see there kind of these little aluminum or metal discs suspended on some sort of an elastomer that moves around, said to kill vibration in the riser and on the shot. That said, as is always the case, we do like to get a sense for not only the vibration, but the actual sound that we're getting out of the system. We, as always, took this guy outside, again, set to that ATA spec, shooting a 400 grain arrow with our directional decibel meter set exactly 3 feet from the horizontal shooting position of the actual bow itself, and we did get 82.5 decibels. So, coming in at the louder end of the spectrum relative to all of the bows that we've had on test, not only for this year, but also for last year. One caveat that I would note, I did test the sound rating on this guy in that outdoor setting, and it was quite a bit cooler on the particular morning where I was checking into that shot volume. Cold air can slightly increase decibel rating because the cooler, denser air actually kind of carries sound waves a little bit better than warmer air. But that said, we did come in with 82.5 decibels. Next, let's talk about the rest mounting interface. So like many others, they are carrying forward with a dual burger hole right there. So if you have a rest that uses burger holes and can support 2 of them, you can get a really kind of firm attachment point to the riser. And then they have gone to the trouble of machining in this dovetail here, working with any of the integrate style rests that are out on the market. They are doing away with, something that they had last year, which was an actual dovetail that was specific to some of their sights that could actually go inside the riser. Instead, they've moved a special kind of groove cut channel here to the very inside of the riser where you can actually put in some sort of a little slider sight that they have available. And then, as is always the case with most manufacturers, multiple holes here on the back where you can install your slider mount as well. So 2 different options there as it relates to sights for the Proven 34 this year. All right, as far as additional vibration dampening that you might find, it is a small vibration dampener actually attached to the metal arm here that supports those cable guards. So maybe a little bit more vibration dampening coming out of that system, but all in, a very secure and stable system for those roller guards in a very traditional place on this bow. The last kind of really marquee feature or adjustment that they are offering, and they've had this now for a couple of years, is what they are calling grip lock. So overall, one thing to note, I do like the grip. They have this little groove here in the front. For me, that kind of gives me a reference point for those front fingers when I am at full draw to make sure that I have kind of a very repeatable hand position. But they are also doing, on this very kind of target style, very flat grip, what they are calling grip lock. So you can see here, you can loosen these set screws and you can actually change the angle of the actual grip assembly that is attached to the riser. Again, further kind of fine-tuning the feel of that bow with that grip lock technology. Last but not least, this is running on what they kind of have marked here as their Bowtech factory strings and cables, which I believe have been fairly durable for most folks out in the field. So that is the all-in summary for the Proven 34. As we had mentioned at the outset, perhaps one of the stiffest and smoothest drawing bows that we've had in test so far this year. And all of that adjustment and capability coming to you right out of the box for $1,449. If you liked this review, please consider following us on Instagram, giving us a like here, or subscribing to the channel. We are going to continue our series looking at longer axle-to-axle hunting bows for 2025, focusing really on those flagship bows, and ultimately arriving at a review of reviews where we take all of these different metrics and ways that we measure these machines, coming up with what we think is our best bow for 2025. Hope you'll join us on the next one.